5, 4, 3.
Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, medical marijuana is on its way, plus opioid addiction in the workplace. Let's do it.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we have two very important topics on the agenda today. We're going to talk a little bit about medical marijuana. It's coming to the state of Pennsylvania sooner than you think. Try next year. In addition to that, opioid addiction in the workplace. What does it mean? We have a legal expert on that's going to explain what employers go through, how it affects the workplace. But first, Heather Stauffer, she's with LNP Media. She wrote a great story in her organization's newspaper about medical marijuana. Heather, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, let's start with this simple question. When will folks be able to get medical marijuana?
Early next year is what the Department of Health is saying. There was an exception for minors who qualify that started last year, but everyone else has to wait until early 2018.
Early 2018. Well, that's not that far away. That'll be on us before we know it. All right. We got folks out there who I'm sure have a deep interest in this. They may have one of the illnesses that are covered. We'll get into that. Who's eligible?
There are 17 serious medical conditions that the law outlines. I'm not going to read all of them, but they include cancer, AIDS, ALS, epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, seizures, autism, and post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yep, and some are a little bit more vague, like neuropathic pain,
right?
Intractable seizures. I mean,
severe chronic pain.
Yeah, severe chronic pain. Good way to put it. So, okay, you're eligible, or someone in your family is eligible. How do you get to even sign up for it? Maybe if that's the way to put it.
Sign up is a good word. So there are a couple of things you will need to do. You're going to need to register with the Department of Health, and they haven't rolled out that registration process yet, so we're not sure exactly what it will look like. It does appear that there will be some kind of fee, but we don't know what that is. You will also need to get a certification from a doctor who is participating in the program. So not all doctors are going to participate in the program.
Yep.
You need to find one who is. You need to go to that doctor, and that doctor has to look over your medical history and what you've tried and certify that you have one of the conditions that's covered, right, and then say, yes, I recommend that you try medical marijuana.
One of the things that's fascinating to me is they do not call this, and you wrote about this, that's how I know, they don't call it a prescription. So you're not getting a prescription for medical marijuana, you're getting a
certification.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that federally, all forms of marijuana are still Schedule I, they're still illegal. So the doctor cannot prescribe medical marijuana for you. You cannot go to a pharmacy and get it. And most likely, it will not be covered by insurance.
Yeah.
The law specifically says here in Pennsylvania that insurance does not have to cover medical marijuana. And most of the people that I've talked to said if insurers don't have to cover it, they will not.
Yeah, that's a great point. So you would think at some juncture, there's going to have to be some discussion if, in fact, I'll use the word prescribed. I'll probably get into trouble. The Attorney General might call me and ask me about it. So if you get a prescription in legally a certification, and you've got one of these very serious healthcare problems, you would think at some point, given the nature that it would be covered by health insurers, but I guess they can't touch it because it's technically illegal? Oh, it violates federal law, correct?
It is. They're not going to prescribe it while it's illegal, is my understanding. That said, I have also heard people say, if you have a plan through your job, if your insurer sees some financial benefit to covering it, they may consider it at that point. So maybe if it comes off the Schedule I list,
right,
and if they see it as a good alternative to opioids or something like that.
So to get where we are now, once the Department of Health is going to play this big regulatory and monitoring role.
Yes.
You've got to get certified by the department. You have to find a physician. I want to talk more about that, a physician. Then you have to, the doctor himself, herself, will have to go through a process to get all your medical records, to get into the details of it, to find out, if you qualify. Doctors are going to have to be very careful about it. But in the main, we yet don't know how many doctors are going to participate. Is that correct?
We have no idea, essentially, how many doctors are going to participate. The Department of Health has been asking for a lot of public comment through this, and through online surveys. They did one for doctors. They had, I think, 191 doctors respond, and 75% of them said they were planning to participate.
Okay.
That said, the Pennsylvania Medical Society represents 16,000 doctors and medical students, and it opposed legalizing medical marijuana in Pennsylvania.
Right.
They think they need more research, they need controlled studies,
Yeah.
they want to see the kinds of studies that you see with other drugs, and they haven't seen those.
Okay, we're going to run to a break, and when we come back, I want to get into there's a couple of other very, very important areas about these so-called dispensary permits, and this is really quite complicated, the stages and the steps and the folks that are involved in the process. I'm chatting with Heather Stauffer. She's with LNP Media, and we'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Before we return to Heather, just a couple of interesting facts about medical marijuana and recreational pot in our state. In 2015 at Franklin and Marshall College, we did a poll. We asked the voters of the state about medical marijuana. 87% of the voters of the state support medical marijuana, something that's pretty rare. A majority of both Democrats and Republicans support it. In addition to that, 29 states and the District of Columbia now have it. On the recreational pot, last spring at the aforementioned college, for the first time in any poll that I have seen in our state, 56% of voters in this state think that we ought to allow recreational marijuana to become legal. 8 states now have recreational marijuana, and the way it looks in a number of state legislatures around the country, we could add 8, 10, some suggest maybe even 12 states with some form, different laws, different ways to regulate it, and different considerations when it comes to pot. Which gets me to the point about, well, we have medical marijuana. Can you smoke it? When the doctor, this is a good point. How do you ingest it? Do you take it in pill form?
Pennsylvania's law does not authorize smoking it, although technically it does allow it in forms for vaporization or nebulization, so
Right.
You could quibble a little bit about that. But it does authorize pills, oils, gels, creams, ointments, tinctures, and liquids. So
Yeah. So it could be in a whole variety of forms, and
it could be. We're kind of going to have to see what the processors decide to make.
All right, so patients, let's review this. Patients find a doctor that is on the list, participating in the program. How do they do that?
There is going to be a list on the Department of Health's website of the doctors who have registered with them and completed the required 4-hour class. So you can't just say, I'm a doctor, I want to prescribe medical marijuana. You have to take this 4-hour class. And then they'll say, okay.
And we don't have any clue yet about regionalization of it, and where there'll be more doctors in urban areas versus suburb, or we don't know.
We don't know. I asked some of the health systems around here and didn't get really clear answers on whether they're going to participate or not.
So then the other question is, what restrictions are going to be placed on physicians?
Doctors who are registered with the program can't have a financial stake in the industry. So you can't be a doctor who's participating and also own part of a medical marijuana company.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to give samples. They can't prescribe to anyone in their own family, that kind of thing.
But if we take a look more broadly, we have already, and I wrote it down, let me refer to it. It looks like there's 27 organizations that have what they call dispensing permits and 12 facilities to grow.
Right, and some of those dispensing permits allow them to have more than one dispensary. So at this point, I believe the Department of Health said there are going to be 52 dispensaries across the state.
Okay.
At various places.
So summarizing this, here we are, this show airs statewide. Let's talk about where they're located. There's a couple right here in South Central Pennsylvania where we're sitting at the moment.
There are. So there are a bunch around Philadelphia, obviously. I think there are a bunch around Pittsburgh. It gets a little sparser toward the top of the state. Here in Lancaster County, we have one dispensary permit, and then there are a couple of grow permits over in Berks County.
One dispensary. And the Department of Health is going to expand this, right?
They are expecting to do a second round of grower processor permits and a second round of dispensary permits.
Give it. Now you've actually interviewed a whole variety of people for your stories on this. The fact is that we've got this overwhelming support. What can you generally say about the receptivity of this program? Is it going to be so complicated with all the regulations that doctors and patients will have a problem, or do you think that'll? That's a tough question.
I am not a pollster
maybe
like you.
Maybe an unfair question. What is it?
I can tell you that based on the medical societies not supporting the legalization of medical marijuana, saying we want to see more research, I think it's a big question how many doctors are going to participate. I talked to one local doctor who said, not for me. He said he's heard from a couple of people who are currently using it illegally, who wanted him to be able to prescribe it for them. When he said, I can't prescribe it, here's the process, here's the way the process is going to work, he said they hung up on him.
Yeah, I mean, on one level, you can certainly understand the physician, the medical society's positions about implementing this and where does it all go. The other consideration is, with 8 states legalizing it, 29 states, how omnipresent does it become? And then you have the question of once will there be abuse in it, and where does that all go? So these are not bad questions
no,
to
they're
ask.
good questions. I don't know the answer. So how many doctors are going to participate, I think, is a big question. How much it will cost people who are going to have to pay for it out of pocket is another big question.
All right, last question. How do the folks out there get more information?
You can always visit the Department of Health's website. They're posting things.
Google Department of Health.
Yes, they have a section of their website that's dedicated to the medical marijuana.
All right.
program.
Well, look, thanks for coming on. This was a wonderful update. All right, we're going to talk about, we're going to continue our discussion in some respects about drugs. We're going to talk about opioid in the workplace and the problems that exist there given the huge expansion of the abuse of opioids in our society. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source.
So commercials and all that. So.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Well, opioid addiction in the workplace, it's a growing problem, and it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. I'm going to talk about that with an attorney. She's a partner in Barley Snyder. Her name is Jennifer Craighead Carey. Jennifer, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Look, this is a really significant topic that I don't think gets covered much. We've talked a lot about opioid addiction. I mean, both state and federal public officials are all over it, appropriating more money. But we don't talk about what it means, employer-employee relationship, and that's a significant problem. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's estimated that 71% of employers have been impacted by employees abusing opioid medications. And if you look at the statistics, the number of prescription opioids sold since 1999 has quadrupled.
Yeah.
The number of overdoses for opioids, both illegal and legal, has quadrupled. So it's a real problem in society, and it definitely impacts the workplace.
Yeah, and when we were chatting earlier, and you provided me with some important information, you said that the testing programs that go on in the workplace have been sort of with the traditional drugs that, you know, heroin. You know more about this than I do, obviously, and not opioids sort of left off the table. How important is that?
Well, traditionally, workplace drug testing programs have concentrated on the 5 most common illegal drugs, and obviously heroin is an opioid, but
Sure.
not on prescription opioids or prescription medications. Sure. And trend-wise, what we're seeing in the workplace is increasing abuse of opioid prescription medications, and it could come from something as simple as an employee has a workplace injury and is prescribed an opioid medication for pain and becomes addicted to that medication. And even after the doctor stops prescribing the medication, they may get it off the street, they may get it from a relative
Sure.
or a friend. That's very common, and then it starts to impact their performance at work.
And the employer may not even be aware it's going on until he or she observes a slippage in the workplace or certain habits that seem unusual in an employee.
Right. That's a very delicate balance, because you may start to see declining performance, attendance and tardiness issues, difficulty interacting with others, increased anxiety or agitation, and it can become very difficult to confront an employee about that, because you really don't know what's going on in their personal life, and it's hard to assume that somebody's abusing medication.
Now, when it comes to what an employer can do, we're into an interesting area where they might have a prescription that they're using. What is it that employers can do in terms of dealing with prescriptions and non-prescription drug use in the workplace?
Right. So a few things. Certainly, if employees are working in safety-sensitive or critical work positions, an employer would want to have something in their policy that requires them to report any medication that might impair safety in the workplace, and that should be done in a way that protects the employee's confidentiality. So rather than reporting it to an immediate supervisor, they would go to human resources, and there could be an evaluation done to make sure that there's not a safety risk. From a legal standpoint, the Americans with Disabilities Act does not protect current illegal drug users, and current illegal drug use can also include using a prescription opioid without a valid medication or without a valid prescription, or using that medication inconsistent with the prescription.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about what resources might be available. I think this is an important subject to an employer, and we'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives.
Well, opioid addiction in the workplace is a growing problem. It's not getting any better, and it's creating situations for both the employee and the employer. And so more and more now employers have to have resources to deal with it. Some of these employees are long-term. They're great employees. You don't want to lose them. You want to be fair.
Right. If you look at the demographics of opioid prescription abuse, it tends to be female, people over 40, and non-white Hispanics, and so it is affecting an aging workforce. In terms of what employers can do, certainly if an employer sees signs of opioid addiction, having a discussion with the employee about declining performance and offering, if the employer has an employee assistance program, offering those services to the employee if they are struggling personally. But I think most importantly, having a drug-free workplace policy is critical.
Yeah.
A policy that tests not only for illegal drugs but for opioid medications. And certainly if an employee can produce a lawful prescription and is using that consistent with the prescription, that's one thing. But if they're abusing the medication, that needs to be addressed. And also, as part of the program, offering assistance to employees who voluntarily come forward and acknowledge that they have a problem, and providing them with a medical leave of absence rather than treating it as a punitive issue, I think is important.
Yeah. So have you seen, given your law practice, have you seen an increase in cases where people are dismissed and they end up in court and employers have to defend their decisions in the last couple of years? I wouldn't know why not. Or does the employee just get out of the picture entirely because they don't want to deal with the problem?
Well, certainly terminations that result from workplace drug use can create issues for the employer. Oftentimes people who are misusing opioid medications deny it. They're embarrassed by it, and so there may be a tendency to want to litigate because they feel that their reputation is at issue. Particularly, we see that in the healthcare profession, where you may have a doctor or a nurse who's diverting medication away from patients for their own misuse, and that obviously would have a significant impact on their career if they're not willing to voluntarily acknowledge the problem and get help.
Yeah, and it's certainly, before we end this segment, there is no doubt that this is a growing problem, and maybe it needs much more of a societal discussion, deciding what policies want. Look, I want to thank you for coming in. This is a wonderful update, and it's something that we're obviously going to follow on this program. Thanks a lot, Jennifer.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.